Well, welcome everybody to this case study presentation on the Lower Chickahominy Watershed. It's entitled Rediscovering the True History of Osekohamen, and I really appreciate everybody's participation, not only in this particular case study presentation, but all morning with our Summit on Equitable Collaboration. Really pleased to see the cadre of stars this morning talking about this issue and how we improve on not only equitable collaboration, but diversity, equity, inclusion throughout our work and personal lives. So thank you all for being a part of this. Let me go ahead and introduce our presentation panelists today. First, we have Sarah Stewart, who is Manager of Environmental Programs at Plan RVA, which is a local Richmond Planning District Commission. Welcome, Sarah. We also have Laura McKay, who works for the Department of Environmental Quality, Manager of the Coastal Zone Management Program, and a longtime state employee and participant in all of this. Lastly, from the Chickahominy tribe, Mr. Dana Adkins. Welcome, Dana. Thank you so much. So let's talk about what's going to happen. They're going to speak and their presentation for about 20 minutes. We encourage you to pose your questions in the chat box, and we will review those questions at the end of their presentation and hopefully add some clarity and additional input to this presentation. We're going to really look through the lens of equitable collaboration throughout this presentation. We want you to think about what this summit is about and how this project and this process aids in that collaborative outlook on how we approach and work with tribes in the Commonwealth and how we restore equity in these relationships. We'll have lots of warnings of time and so forth. And like Governor Northam said today, I wish we were all together in person and we had lots and lots of time to talk and discuss and converse around these principles. But we don't have a lot of time, but really, again, thank you for being here and glad I'm with you. We're going to list some highlights also. We have a staff intern, Yuki, with us today, and she's going to help us to look at the chat box, record some great ideas and concepts too around equitable collaboration with regard to this project. So without any further delay, let me turn it over to Sarah, Laura, and Dana. I believe Dana will lead us off today with our presentation. Thank you both, all of you, for your efforts.
Yep. Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Stewart with Plan RVA. So welcome to the Lower Chickahominy Watershed, Rediscovering the True History of Osekohamen. You'll note the asterisk statement at the bottom of this slide. Most of you have probably never seen the word Osekohamen before. So the name Chickahominy, or the word Chickahominy, is derived from the Algonquin word Osekohamen. So we are looking at the true history of Osekohamen. Excuse me. We're going to essentially go through a story. Dana will start a few hundred years ago, and we will bring it up to present day. And it meanders a bit, but there's certainly a common theme that the Lower Chickahominy project kind of ties it all back together. So I think you'll see that. Bear with me. There we go. Here's our names and positions. So if you need to get in touch with us afterwards, you can. All right, Dina, I'll hand it off to you.
Thanks, Sarah. So I'm going to briefly talk about the Chickahominy tribe and how it was impacted by colonization, what impacts we faced by policies that were enacted by the Commonwealth in the early 20th century, and finally, federal recognition and how that has impacted us today. Next slide, please. Okay, so the Chickahominy tribe was one of approximately 40 tribes in Eastern Virginia that made first contact with the Jamestown settlers. The majority of the tribes were part of the Powhatan Confederation. However, my tribe, the Chickahominy, was one of the most powerful tribes in the area and remained autonomous from Powhatan's chiefdom. The The rivers were generally named after the tribes who established villages along their banks. Next slide. Okay, for your reference, what we're showing here is just the ancestral Chickahominy territory in relation to Jamestown and the city of Richmond. Next slide. Now, this map shows a more detailed view of the locations of Chickahominy villages during the time of colonization. Applicant, you'll see, is the furthest north, the northernmost village, and Osekohamen, you'll see, is the southernmost village. Now, you'll see down further south on the Chickahominy, right at the mouth to the James River, two other villages. These were most likely not Chickahominy villages. Next slide. Okay, so colonization led to the forced relocation of the Chickahominy from its ancestral lands. The proximity of Jamestown to the Chickahominy community placed a great deal of stress on Chickahominy culture due to the fact that as English settlement got denser in eastern Virginia, the Algonquin languages faded. And you have to understand that the Chickahominy villages were only about 16 miles from the Jamestown settlement by water. Now, it's difficult for a small population to keep up a language when most of the people in the surrounding area speak something else. The native speakers must constantly do business with outsiders and do it in the colonist language. This is important to note because the loss of the native language to a community is the beginning of the loss of traditional knowledge and cultural identity. The Chickahominy established new villages north of the York River, and eventually villages were established further north along the Mattapony River. It is believed that we lost our last tract of land in the early 18th century. We were essentially refugees in our own homeland. Next slide. Now, this map shows the original location of the Chickahominy villages. The southernmost dot was where we were located during the time of colonization, around 1607 and pre-1607. The dots further north were those locations that we were forcibly relocated to after 1646. These locations were at least 25 miles north of the original villages. Next slide. So the 20th century was a time of great change for the Chickahominy people. Under the Racial Integrity Act, Virginia's policies of segregation were among the most severe in the nation. This act was passed in 1924 and was drafted by Dr. Walter Plecker, an avowed white supremacist and the first registrar of Virginia's Bureau of Vital Statistics. Next slide. Plecker's policies destroyed and altered records that individuals and families needed in order to prove our cultural continuity as Indians. According to state policy, Virginia's indigenous peoples no longer existed. Higher education was not available for Indians in Virginia until the 1960s. Tribal members built schools and raised funds to pay teacher salaries. Even so, our children were barred by state law from receiving a diploma in Virginia. As a result, many of our children went to Oklahoma to complete high school and attend college. Next slide. In time, the Chickahominy people saw the repeal of the Racial Integrity Act. The tribe was granted federal official recognition by the Commonwealth of Virginia in 1983. And today we are one of 7 federally recognized tribes in the Commonwealth. The Chickahominy were federally recognized on January 11th, 2018, after U.S. Senators Tim Kaine and Mark Warner secured passage of the Thomasina E. Jordan Indian Tribes of Virginia Federal Recognition Act of 2017. Federal recognition, although a long and hard-fought process for the Chickahominy tribe, still has presented a new set of challenges for us today. Although we are recognized as a sovereign nation by the federal government, what is our relationship with the Commonwealth of Virginia, various state agencies within the Commonwealth, local governments? State and federal recognition is not the end of our journey to be heard, but rather another step along the path to equity. Thank you.
Thanks, Dana. And we are excited to walk that path with you. I'm Laura McKay with the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program. And if we go to the next slide, we are actually a network of state agencies and coastal localities, and we operate under the Federal Coastal Zone Management Act of 1972, as well as a Virginia gubernatorial letter that continues the program in perpetuity. And our mission is to protect, restore, and strengthen both our coastal and ocean ecosystems and our coastal economy. The Department of Environmental Quality serves as the lead agency for the network, so we are housed there. But again, we are a collection of the laws and policies of Virginia that protect coastal resources. So next slide. So back in, I don't know, around 2001 or so, we developed a map of a mapping portal called Coastal Gems that you can get to online. Just Google Coastal Gems. And we began to map all of the coastal resources in our coastal zone. And this is the coastal zone here. It's all the cities, counties, and towns that touch on tidal water or the ocean. And one of the things that people asked us to do was, we had all these layers in there, but it was really hard to discern when you put all those layers together, where is the highest ecological value? So in 2013, working with our partners in the other agencies, we mapped both the blue and the green infrastructure of the coastal zone. And so that's what this map here is. We call it Coastal Viva. And so in those purple and dark blue areas, that's where you see the highest ecological value based on data from Department of Wildlife Resources, Conservation Recreation, VIMS, and others. So over the years, we have worked in most of those places that are purple and blue in terms of trying to protect resources, doing land acquisitions, various projects. But one place that really popped out was the lower Chickahominy. So if we go to the next slide, and there it is in close-up, the areas encompassing the counties of Charles City, New Kent, and James City. And those areas really stood out. And so the Coastal Zone Management Program thought, we really need to do something in this area. It's not a place where we have paid a lot of attention. So if we go to the next slide, one of the provisions in the Coastal Zone Management Act is Section 306A, which allows for grants for land acquisition. And so although CZM programs across the country haven't yet given a grant to any tribe to acquire land under Section 306A, a similar CZM program called CELP, the Coastal and Estuarine Land Conservation Program, has done so. And nationally, NOAA, who is our federal agency that we receive all of our funding from, they had given a grant to a tribe in the Great Lakes. And so we're actually hoping that if we in Virginia can give a 306A grant to the tribe, that we might be one of the first in the nation to do so. So as Dana mentioned, in 1718, the tribe lost its last tract of land. And so 300 years later, when the tribe received federal recognition, they are technically eligible to receive CGM funds for land acquisition. And so we hope we can finally begin to repair 300 years of trauma by assisting with purchase of that land. So we started working with the tribe in summer of 2018 to look for parcels, and we've been looking, we're still looking. And some of the things that we are hoping to accomplish on that land would be the reinterment of ancestral remains that the tribe has very sadly had to keep in warehouses. So we want to return those remains to some sacred ancestral grounds. and also want to be able to provide public access to the water for paddling and ecotourism, and also to provide space to really tell the true story of the tribe, present that tribal history in their words, from their mouths, on their land. So we're very excited about trying to make that happen. So if we go to the next slide, Sarah. So there's another section of the Coastal Zone Act, Section 309, that provides match-free grants for the development of policies. And those run out in a 5-year stream. And so that gives you a good long time to really be inclusive and think about what the needs are and develop a strong strategy. And those policies can include things like laws. It could be state laws, it could be regulations, local ordinances, memoranda of understanding, or guidance documents. So next slide. So in 2016, we were able to lay out a 5-year grant strategy and provide about $680,000 match-free to Plan RVA and to develop these policies over time. And Sarah's going to tell you more about that project. And again, the idea is to both protect the natural resources and provide some sort of sustainable economic development based on the protection of those resources. So we hope that the tribe will share their indigenous wisdom with us as we work together to care for the lands of the Chickahominy. And I wanted to mention I've been reading a book called Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, who is a botanist and a member of the Potawatomi tribe, and learned a great deal from that book. And I hope to be able to put that into practice. I highly recommend it. And also wanted to say in closing that my daughter, who's the registrar at the Fralin Art Museum at UVA, just told me this morning as I was talking to her about this summit today, she said that in the museum world, they say, nothing about us without us. So hopefully we can all heal together, and we are so grateful to the Chickahominy tribe in their willingness to work with us and try to repair some of these past traumas. So with that, I will turn it over to Sarah to tell you more about the project.
All right, I really like that that saying, that kind of quote or theme. All right, let's talk about the Lower Chickahominy project. So as Laura was saying, about 5 years ago, 6 years ago now, the Coastal Zone program reached out and said they really wanted to focus a project on the Lower Chickahominy. Being from a planning district commission, or working for a planning district commission, we have member local governments. I'll add that New Kent and Charles City are both in the Plan RVA, and James City County is actually in HRPDC, the Hampton Roads PDC. Since 2 localities are with Plan RVA, we kind of took it, but I should add that HRPDC has been involved in this process throughout. They are involved now. So this is, we're all working together on this. So this has been we are in year 5. We recently started year 5. And as Laura has mentioned, there is a dual kind of purpose of both natural resource conservation and economic development. And we are looking for policies and ways in which those 2 things can kind of go hand in hand. When we first reached out to the localities about interest in a project in this area, they said, that sounds great. We agree. There's ecological integrity here. Natural resource conservation is important, but we don't want to lose sustainable economic development in the process. It's a heard, understood, let's move forward. A note about this map, the hatched area is the actual watershed of the Lower Chickahominy. But we have been in our discussions about policies and programs. We focus on the entirety of all 3 counties, not just that little watershed, unless there's a question that pertains just to that watershed. So as I mentioned, we're just starting year 5. This has definitely been a process. So year one, you'll see data gathering and updates. So one of the things that the BCZM program learned when they worked on that VIVA data set that Laura showed us was that a lot of the ecological data, the species data that were located in the Lower Chickahominy Watershed that made it light up blue and purple were actually about to be so old that they could no longer be considered as valid data by a state agency or by anyone using the data. So what that means is that in a few years, it was going to look as though a lot of that ecological significance had vanished. Nobody thought that was actually happening. Nobody thought that was true, but we have to have data, we have to have good data to replace old data. So in year one, actually, a large chunk of the funding went to state resource agencies to update ecological and water quality data. What that showed is indeed, there is still a lot of ecological integrity and importance in that watershed area. That's what we thought. The result we got. That was great. And that means that there really is a purpose to focusing on that area and trying to find ways to conserve the natural resources and find that sustainable economic development, those sustainable economic development opportunities. So in year two, we worked with George Mason University and Urban Analytics, Inc. To do an economic study. I should point out that everything that's produced throughout all these years is located on, if you go to Plan RVA, the website, you will find a Lower Chickahominy project page, and you can find the economic study there. You can find all kinds of reports, summaries, and more information about the watershed in general. So the economic study, we asked the questions, do conserved lands cost a locality money? Do they hurt kind of that local bottom line? Because that was going to be a recurring question. And then we also said, does the economy benefit from their presence? Do they help, do natural resources or conserved lands support the local economy? The answer to the first question is no. Conserved lands do not cost the locality money. And if you want to know why, it's because the services that are provided to them cost less than the taxes that they pay. To answer the question about do conserved natural resources support the economy, yes, there are aspects of the economy, pieces of the economy that rely either directly or indirectly in the Lower Chickahominy Watershed on conserved lands and conserved natural resources. So that proved to us that yes, proceeding forward, looking for policies and programs that would support natural resource or land conservation and sustainable economic development was a worthwhile venture. Those resources still existed, and this could benefit the localities and their bottom line, because that was certainly a question that they had. In year three, IEN joined us and led the outreach portion. Now I should mention that there was a small stakeholder group that was gathered for year one and year two, but it really kicked into high gear in that year three. There was a process of thought leader interviews, focus groups, a public survey was released, and the findings of that are all in a report that you can find online on the project website. We got a long list of different policy ideas of there are so many different opportunities for ways to focus on natural resources and land conservation and economic development, So in year four, we had to kind of not narrow the field. Everything is still an option, but we had to say, okay, we've got a lot of options. Let's focus on putting, one step in front of the other. What can we do? And so we had a local government tribal workshop, which I'll speak about in a minute. And we had a regional policy summit. And then Plan RVA actually did an ecotourism infrastructure inventory. Kind of the meat behind that is a set of GIS data, but the public face of that is a series of story maps that you can access on the project website. And year five, what we're doing right now is creating the Lower Chickahominy Watershed Collaborative. So one idea that had come up many times throughout has been a forum, a space where that doesn't exist already, where governments, stakeholders, interested citizens could go and have discussions about policy and program ideas in Lower Chickahominy that relate to natural resource and land conservation and economic development. And so we are working on forming that, and then Plan RVA will be working on an ecotourism infrastructure plan because we're planners. So let me go to the next slide to really focus on that tribal local government relationship, and then the workshop and a collaborative that we're forming, excuse me. So one of the themes that was evident early on was that this could not be just a conversation between local governments. Well, we knew that. We knew we needed to include stakeholders, but that we really needed to pay far more attention than potentially even originally thought to the tribes of the watershed. Dana is obviously with the Chickahominy tribe, but there are two others that I would like to mention. There's the Chickahominy Indians Eastern Division, and then I should also mention the Pamunkey tribe. Pamunkey tribe is actually not based in the Chickahominy watershed, but they do own land. So we definitely wanted to include them in discussions. After federal recognition, it also became evident that there were looming questions that we weren't really sure how to answer. No one was completely sure how to answer of how a local government and a federally recognized tribe were supposed to have a relationship. There were a lot of legal questions. There were a lot of just logistical questions. Who talks to who picks up the phone? How do you best connect? When do you best connect? We're working on some of those. I'm not going to say every question is solved right now, but the first step towards that was the local government tribal workshop. As I said last time, initially planned pre-COVID in face-to-face. We ended up doing a virtual workshop, which I think still worked. And we had, I think I saw Elizabeth Andrews on here. BCPC was wonderful and joined us for that and helped give a few presentations and answer some questions about that dynamic and that relationship. And so where that has gotten us through the workshop and then the policy summit is to the formation of a Lower Chickahominy Watershed Collaborative. But right now, we've got a draft MOU that we're tweaking, and we're working on the proposed structure. So, okay. Now we can, I'm not sure of the time, but we can either talk about, hit on some of these points or answer questions. I admit I've not been watching the chat. So what pleases the group?
I am watching the chat, Ms. Sarah. Thank you so much. And thank you all to our presenters for a really nice overview of the Chickahominy project, Lower Chickahominy project. We have a few minutes for questions, and there's several in the chat box, and I will turn to Bruce from NAE about perhaps environmental education community. I'll read it, and then we'll see who might be the best person to answer. So it's in the chat. How can the environmental education community help support and engage Native communities both locally and statewide? Are there educational components of this project, such as providing funding for MIWIs, which are meaningful watershed educational experiences for those who have not seen that acronym before, or field experiences for local students? So perhaps Dana, wondering if you might respond to this initially, and then we'll see if anybody else does.
Okay, thanks, Mike. I think that the environmental education communities can help support and engage Native communities by just taking a look at the history books, how they're written now. I think they're probably written from one perspective and not from the perspective of the Native communities. So I think the first place is to start is to look at what histories that you are relaying to your students. From there, I would say that then you should just maybe take a look at what the state educational or the schools are doing. I'm sure their histories are probably the same. So I think first it's going to start with the message. What message is being delivered, and bring the Native communities in to help rewrite that message if it needs to be rewritten. I think that's the first place to start.
Thank you, Dana. Sarah, Laura, any additional comments on how environmental ed can help this process with tribes, understanding tribal history?
Yeah, thanks for that, Dana. And that really does speak to that phrase, nothing about us without us. So we need to hear from the people what the true history is. The other thing I was going to mention is that one of the things we talked about as a policy change was to look at the comprehensive plans of the counties, which always contain a background history of the county, and get those rewritten truthfully. And don't talk about history just as having started in the 1600s, but try to go back further in time to really understand what had been going on this land for thousands of years. So we're excited about that, and just getting more interpretive signage up in the area too, through some of that ecotourism infrastructure plan. I will leave it at that.
Yep, I was
Thanks.
going to mention actually, that is one of the interpretive signage is something that we had inventoried as part of that. And we're touching on things that we were going to touch on in the plan. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you all for those responses to the environmental ed component. Really valuable and important information for everybody. Aaron S. in the chat asks, how do you determine that conserving natural spaces also supports a local economy? Maybe Laura, I'll turn to you. That's, initially that's sort of a disconnect in a certain way. And I was wondering if you would speak to that from the coastal zone management's perspective.
Sure, it's something that we first started looking at over on the eastern shore of Virginia, where there is quite a lot of conserved land. And, as you saw from that Coastal Viva map, high ecological value over there. And there was a lot of concern. The local people thought, oh, we have so much conserved land, we don't have any space for industry and economic development. But in fact, as Sarah mentioned, when we did economic studies, George Mason did it for us on the Eastern Shore and then repeated it in the Chickahominy. The money that you spend on servicing those developed areas is so high that there's actually a net local tax revenue benefit from conserved land, because it doesn't cost you. You don't have to have schools and roads and hospitals and all of those support mechanisms. So conserved land is easy to maintain and saves money. Plus, if you can use it for several things, multiple benefits, coastal resilience as sea levels rise, and you have those natural areas absorbing rainwater and flooding issues. And plus, if you can add in ecotourism, and especially in the time of COVID, we're finding people, they're stuck in their houses and they're going nuts. So the best thing you can do is go out into nature. And so for human health reasons. So a lot of good ways in which conserved land can really help us economically and healthfully.
Thanks, Laura. Great response. I'm so sorry we can't get to all these great questions now that are in the chat. We'll have time for one more from Tiffany Sievers. And Dana, it seemed to be directed to you. Mr. Adkins, how can state agencies better engage with tribes in your view? And then a secondary question about, do you feel like your resources as a tribe are being protected by the Commonwealth, maybe now protected by the Commonwealth? Anyway, Dana, your response to those chat questions would be great.
Okay, thank you for that question. As far as state agencies engaging with the tribes, I think it has to begin with being more than just a bullet point seen in an email sent from the upper levels of the state government. I think this is something that needs to be reinforced on a regular basis. I have no doubt that from the governor's office, secretary of the Commonwealth's office, that they are sincere about engaging with us. Now, as this message filters down through to the various agencies, I don't get the same feeling that in all agencies, it's taken quite so seriously. Again, I think it's probably more a bullet point, another email that they get and they read it, and then it's a memory. So I think it has to start there. It has to be reinforced by the managers and the various agencies. The second question, or the second part, I think that as far as our natural resources, I think the state has done a good job of protecting natural resources. But again, that benefits everybody. I think the bigger question is, what has the state done to protect our cultural resources? And I think that's really the question that needs to be focused on and really looked at hard going forward.
I just want to step
Thank
in
you,
here. We've got
Dana,
about
and
30
I-
seconds. We need to wrap it up.
Thank you, Jason. Yes, I wanted to, in this last few seconds, thank our panelists one more time. If you want to give a virtual hand clap or a visible one on your screen, really appreciate their presentations today, 2 sessions in a row, and a great project. Really appreciate that. Thank you all for your participation. Look forward to seeing you soon and